My manipulative girlfriend pulled an infidelity prank on me for my birthday. I destroyed her in that same instant. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. My name's Julio. I'm 24 years old, and this story begins several years before what happened on my birthday. To understand why what happened later affected me so much, I have to explain how I met Artemisa and what our relationship was like at the beginning. Artemisa and I were completely different people. I was always quite shy. I had no trouble talking to someone when it was necessary, but I found it very difficult to approach new people, especially if there were several strangers around. I preferred to stay silent rather than say something that might be awkward. She was the complete opposite. Artemisa was extremely sociable. She was always surrounded by people, new people from different majors, and seemed to have a knack for making friends anywhere. She was one of those people who could arrive at a gathering where they knew no one, and half an hour later they were already talking as if they had known each other for years. We met at the university. I was studying programming and she business administration. We didn't have many classes in common, but we both took calculus with the same professor. For the first few weeks, we barely spoke. I usually sat in one of the back rows, took notes, and tried to go unnoticed. Artemisa sat further ahead with several friends. The problem was that there was a group of girls from my class who had started to bother me. It wasn't something I initially considered too serious. They made comments about me, laughed when I raised my hand to answer something, and occasionally one of them would come up to say something to me just to make me nervous. Since I was quite reserved, my reaction was usually to ignore them. I never knew how to respond. Besides, I always thought that if it were a man, I could defend myself more directly, but in this case, they were girls and I wasn't going to hit or push them. I also didn't want to end up in trouble over a situation I didn't even know how to handle, so I just tried to endure it. One day during the class change, they did it again. One of them took my notebook from the table and started reading aloud some things I had written. They weren't secrets or anything important, but she did it to make fun of my note-taking style. The others started laughing. I tried to get the notebook back, but she held it up so I couldn't reach it. That's when Artemisa appeared. "Are you done?" she asked. The girls stopped laughing. One of them replied that they were just playing with me. Artemisa took the notebook from her hands and gave it to me. "Well, he doesn't seem to be having fun." She didn't say anything else. The girls made some comments, but finally left. I was quite embarrassed. Artemisa sat in front of me and asked if I was okay. I told her I was. She asked me why I never said anything to them. I explained that I didn't know what to do. She looked at me for a few seconds and then laughed. Not at me. Rather, she seemed surprised that someone could be so reserved. "You have to learn to defend yourself," she told me. "You can't let anyone treat you like that." I thanked her. I thought that would be the only time we would talk. I was wrong. From that day on, she started to get closer to me more and more. At first, it was small conversations before class. Then she started asking me things about programming. I would explain some things to her, and she would talk to me about her subjects. Over time, we discovered we had quite a few interests in common. Artemisa started inviting me to sit with her and her friends. At first, I felt completely out of place. They had a very different way of speaking than I did. They teased each other, made jokes constantly, and seemed to have a confidence that I didn't understand. I just sat there listening. Artemisa noticed. "You have to talk," she would tell me. "I'm listening. That doesn't count." Her friends would laugh. Little by little, I started to feel more comfortable. I began to participate in the conversations, and although I never became as extroverted as them, I stopped feeling like I was invading a foreign space. Artemisa was the one who helped me the most. She completely integrated me into her group. Over time, we stopped being just classmates. We started going out, first to study, then to eat, then to spend practically all our free time together. It didn't take long for us to start a relationship. I was in love with her, and for a long time I had the impression that she was also deeply in love with me. At first, everything was very beautiful. Artemisa was still much more extroverted than I was, but that difference didn't seem to be a problem. She said she liked that I was calm. I said I liked that she could talk to anyone without fear. We even joked about our differences. The problem started when she discovered she could prank me very easily. At first, they were small things. Once she changed my phone's wallpaper while I was distracted. Another time, she hid my keys before we left the university and let me search for them for several minutes. She also once told me that she had forgotten to turn in an assignment that I knew perfectly well she had prepared, just to see my reaction. I would get a little annoyed, but I would end up laughing. The problem was that the pranks started to get heavier and heavier, and they almost always happened in front of her friends. For example, one afternoon we were all sitting in a coffee shop after classes. I was talking to one of her friends about a project when Artemisa intervened. "Julio, have you told them what you did yesterday?" I looked at her, confused. "What did I do?" She started to smile. "Never mind." Her friend started asking her what had happened. Artemisa pretended to think for a few seconds. "It's better if he tells it." I had no idea what she was talking about. Finally, she laughed and confessed that nothing had happened. Everyone laughed. I ended up laughing too, although I felt quite uncomfortable. I thought she was just trying to make me feel more comfortable with her friends. Then others began. Once she told them in front of me that I had cried watching a romantic movie. It was a lie. Another time she claimed that I had taken almost an hour to choose my clothes for an outing. That was also a lie. Then she started to invent increasingly absurd stories. She said I was jealous, that I constantly checked her phone, that I didn't know how to be alone, that I needed her to be looking after me all the time. Her friends would laugh. I would try to go along with it. When we were alone, I would sometimes tell her that certain jokes made me uncomfortable. She would usually respond that I was exaggerating. "It's a joke, Julio." That phrase began to become her usual response. If something bothered me, it was a joke. If I told her she had crossed a line, it was a joke. If her friends laughed at me, it was just part of the trust they all had. And because I loved her, I ended up accepting it. I even came to think that maybe I needed to learn to take things with more humor. What I didn't understand at that moment was that our jokes were changing in nature. They were no longer just small pranks. Artemisa had begun to discover exactly what things could make me nervous, embarrass me, or make me feel insecure. And instead of avoiding those points, she started to use them more and more frequently, and in front of more and more people. I was still convinced that it was all part of her personality. She was extroverted, I was shy. She made jokes, I had to learn to keep up with her. That's what I told myself. And for quite some time it worked until my birthday came. That day, I still didn't know that Artemisa was preparing a prank that was going to completely change the way I saw our relationship. Before my birthday, several situations had already occurred that, seen from the present, I should have taken much more seriously. Artemisa had started to use my insecurities as part of her jokes. One of the first times it happened was when we were with several of her friends after class. I was sitting next to her when suddenly Artemisa said, "The other day, I saw him looking at a girl's, but..." All her friends started laughing. I looked at her, surprised. "What?" Artemisa crossed her arms and pretended to be upset. "Yes, I didn't know you were doing that." I tried to explain that it hadn't happened. "Artemisa, that's not true." She continued with the act. "It doesn't matter. I already know what kind of boyfriend I have." Her friends laughed more and more. After a few seconds, Artemisa smiled. "It's a joke." I didn't laugh. I told her I didn't like her doing that kind of thing. She immediately changed her attitude. First she fell silent, then she looked down, and a few seconds later she started to cry. I didn't expect that reaction. "Why are you angry with me?" she asked. I told her I wasn't angry. I was just telling her that those kinds of jokes made me uncomfortable. She shook her head. "It's just that you never understand my humor." I felt guilty. I tried to explain that I didn't want to argue. Then she said something that would start to repeat over the following months. "If you can't understand me, it means you don't really love me." I told her that wasn't true. She continued to cry. "Then maybe we should break up." That's where I would give in. I didn't want to break up with her. I loved her. So I would end up apologizing, even though I hadn't done anything. "I'm sorry, I didn't want to make you feel bad." She would stop crying shortly after. Sometimes she would hug me. "I just want you to understand my way of being." And I would end up accepting it. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, but it wasn't a one-time thing. There were several. Once she told me in front of her friends that she had been talking to a guy from the university, and that I probably wouldn't find out because I never checked her phone. Then she laughed and said it was a joke. Another time she assured me that she had thought about breaking up with me because she had met someone more interesting. That was also a joke. On another occasion, while we were having dinner with her friends, she said, "Julio is very jealous. If you ever see me hugging another man, He'll probably faint." They all laughed. I tried to smile. Later, when we were alone, I told her I didn't find it funny. Her response was practically the same. First she would get upset, then she would say that I didn't understand her humor, and finally she would start to cry. "If I bother you so much, then leave me." I would end up asking her not to say that. Over time, I understood that this was her mechanism. She could play any joke on me, but if I reacted badly, the conversation would stop being about what she had done and would end up being about how badly I was supposedly making her feel. I would end up comforting her. She would end up forgiving me. And the next day, everything would continue as if nothing had happened. Despite that, I still had moments when Artemisa was the person I fell in love with. That's why it was so hard for me to accept that something was wrong. She could be affectionate, fun, and attentive. She could also be extremely manipulative. I saw both versions and always chose to believe that the first one was the real one, until my birthday. That day was my birthday, and for several days before, Artemisa had been acting strangely. She wouldn't tell me what she was preparing. Every time I asked, she would smile and answer, "It's a surprise." I would insist. She wouldn't say anything. She even asked me not to make plans for that afternoon. "I want the birthday to be just for us." That got my hopes up. I thought she had finally prepared something special. On my birthday, she wrote to me in the morning, wished me a happy birthday, and told me she loved me. Throughout the day, she kept sending me messages telling me not to be late. "I have something prepared for you." I was excited. When I finished my activities, I went home. When I opened the door, I noticed it was too quiet. "Artemisa?" No one answered. I put my things down and walked to the room. The door was ajar. I pushed it, and that's when my world stopped. On the bed were two people. Artemisa was lying on top of another man. Both were partially covered by a sheet. For a few seconds, I couldn't process what I was seeing. I couldn't hear anything. I didn't know what to say. She lifted her head and looked at me. Her expression changed immediately. "Julio." I couldn't speak. She sat up slightly and said, "I'm sorry." Then she paused. "It's not what it looks like." I think that phrase was what finally broke me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My eyes started to fill with tears. "What are you doing?" Artemisa pretended to be desperate. "Julio, please let me explain." I could only look at the man who was next to her. He wasn't saying anything. I was completely devastated. I had trusted her. I had defended her. I had put up with all her jokes, and at that moment I thought it had all been a lie. I started to cry. I couldn't control it. Artemisa looked at me for a few seconds and then said something I still remember perfectly. "This is what you get for not understanding my humor." I stared at her. I didn't understand what she was saying. She took the sheet and finally pulled it away. That's when I saw that both of them were fully dressed. The man was wearing pants and a t-shirt. Artemisa was also dressed. Nothing had happened between them. Before I could process it, I heard several voices behind me. "Surprise!" I turned around. At the door were all of Artemisa's friends. One of them was holding a cake. Another had several balloons. Some were recording with their phones, and Artemisa started to laugh. "Surprise! It's a joke, silly." I couldn't believe it. I stood there completely still. One of her friends was laughing. Another said his face was incredible. I was still crying. I couldn't understand how they could be laughing while I was in that state. Artemisa approached me. "It was just a birthday prank." I looked at her. "A prank?" She smiled. "Yes. You made me believe you were sleeping with another man." But nothing was happening. I didn't know that. She laughed again. That was the point. I felt a mixture of anger, shame, and sadness. I looked at the man on the bed. I knew him. He was one of Artemisa's friends. That didn't make the situation any less painful. On the contrary, it meant that everyone had participated. Everyone knew what was going to happen. Everyone had decided that seeing me suffer would be a good way to celebrate my birthday. I looked around. The cake had my name written on it. There were balloons, there were gifts. They had prepared a whole celebration. But for me at that moment, everything seemed absurd. "Get out." No one answered. I repeated it. "I want everyone to get out of my house." Artemisa stopped smiling. "Julio." "Everyone. Now." One of her friends tried to say that they just wanted to give me a surprise. I interrupted her. I don't care. I pointed to the door. Out. Artemisa started to cry, and for the first time, her tears didn't make me apologize. You can't treat me like this, she said. I looked at her, not understanding how she could be saying that after what she had just done. I'm treating you badly? She shook her head while crying. It was just a joke. You made me believe you were cheating on me. But I didn't cheat on you, because you decided to take off the sheet after seeing me cry. She fell silent. Her friends also stopped laughing. For the first time, no one knew what to say. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking. You know what the worst part is? Artemisa looked at me. That you've done this before. She frowned. What? Not exactly like this. But you've been making jokes for months about breaking up with me, about other men, about not loving me, or that I'm a jealous boyfriend. Every time I tell you it hurts, you cry and make me end up apologizing to you. She tried to get closer. Julio. I stepped back. Don't touch me. She started to cry again. I didn't want to hurt you. I looked at her for a few seconds. Then why did you need to see me crying for the joke to work? She didn't answer. In the end, most of the people who had participated in the prank started to leave the house. I was still by the door, just waiting for them to leave and leave me alone. However, some of Artemisa's friends decided to stay. There were 3 of them. They were sitting in the living room, talking among themselves as if nothing had happened. One of them even took a piece of the cake. I couldn't believe it. I had just spent several minutes crying because I thought my girlfriend had cheated on me, and they were eating cake. Artemisa sat on the sofa and continued to cry. I can't believe you're doing this, she told me. It was just a joke. You already told me that. It's just that you don't know how to take a joke. One of her friends let out a small laugh. He really did overreact. Another said, it's just that Julio has always been too sensitive. I took a deep breath. I tried to stay calm, but after everything that had happened, something inside me just broke. Sensitive? The girl shrugged. Yes, we all knew it was a joke. I didn't. That was precisely the point. The 3 of them started laughing. Artemisa also smiled slightly through her tears. See, she said. Everyone understood the joke except you. I looked at her for a few seconds and then I exploded. Artemisa, you're just a manipulator. It went silent. Every time someone can't stand your jokes, you start to cry. Every time someone tells you that you did something that bothered them, you make that person end up feeling guilty. Not everyone has to put up with your underscore humor just because you decide it's funny. One of her friends' eyes widened. Oof, that must have hurt. Artemisa looked at her, annoyed. Stay out of it. I continued. And you're no better. You're like a canned laugh track from a kid's show. You don't know how to do anything but laugh at stupid things while one of you does something cruel and the others follow. The friends stopped smiling. You're like a group of harpies following Artemisa to make her believe that everything she does is okay. Julio, Artemisa said, stop saying those stupid things. It's just humor. You can shove your humor up your ass. She became serious again. You don't understand. No, Artemisa, the problem is that you don't understand. If you don't understand my humor, then you don't love me. I looked at her. For months, that phrase had been enough to make me back down. Not this time. No. She stood motionless. What? That I don't love you. Artemisa's expression changed immediately. Don't say that. I don't love you anymore because I'm sick of all this underscore. She started to cry again. Julio, you can't break up with me over a joke. I'm not breaking up with you over a single joke. I pointed towards the room. I'm breaking up with you for months of jokes, manipulation, and situations where I always ended up apologizing to you for feeling bad. Artemisa stood up. But I've always defended you. I included you in my group when you had no friends. And I thank you for that. I always did. But helping me years ago doesn't give you the right to treat me however you want during our relationship. One of her friends, who had been quiet until then, intervened. Let's go. He had to be a weirdo from programming. He's ungrateful. We accepted him into the group even though he's always been insecure, full of acne, and doesn't fit in with us. I looked at her. Oh, you want to talk about looks? And what about you? Are you a supermodel? You study administration, but you don't know how to manage your calories. You should eat more. You're too thin. A hurricane would throw you miles out of the city. She opened her mouth to answer. I didn't let her. Besides, it's not even about how we look. It's about the fact that you think you can humiliate someone and then hide behind the word humor. The girl grabbed her bag. You're an idiot. Maybe. I pointed to the door. But right now I'm an idiot who wants all of you to get out of my house. Artemisa started to cry again. Julio, please, can't we talk? We've talked too much. You can't do this to me. You did this to me. She fell silent. Finally, she took her things. Her friends did the same. Before leaving, one of them looked at me and said, tomorrow the whole university is going to know what you're really like. Do what you want. Artemisa stood in front of me for a few seconds. She seemed to be waiting for me to change my mind, to hug her, to tell her that everything was okay. I didn't. Goodbye, Artemisa. She left. I closed the door. I was alone. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to run after her. Then I heard a strange noise. I looked at the table. The cake was still there. I thought I would just have to throw it away. Then it happened. The cake literally exploded. The filling shot out onto the wall, the floor, and part of the furniture. I stood there completely still. For a few seconds, I didn't understand what had happened. Then I remembered that the cake had been part of the surprise. Apparently, they had prepared one last prank. A kind of hidden mechanism made the cake shoot out when a part of the decoration was removed. I stared at the mess. Then I let out a laugh. Not because I found it funny, just because it was too absurd. They had managed to ruin even the cake. I took some towels and started to clean. As I did, I thought about everything that had happened. I realized that for months I had confused love with tolerance. I thought that loving someone meant accepting their flaws, even when those flaws started to hurt me. I thought that if I got upset over a joke, I was being too sensitive. And every time Artemisa cried, I would completely forget what had happened and end up comforting her. That night, I understood something very simple. A joke stops being a joke when only one person is having fun. And above all, no one has the right to use your feelings as entertainment and then demand that you smile to prove that you love them. The following days were awkward. Artemisa tried to contact me several times. I didn't respond. The rumors at the university also began. Some people said I had overreacted. Others said I was unable to take a simple joke. I even heard that some people called me a wimp. At first it bothered me, then it stopped mattering. I no longer had any interest in convincing anyone. The people who really knew me knew what our relationship had been like, and those who had only heard Artemisa's version weren't going to change their minds because I explained every detail. So I went on with my life. I went back to my classes, continued with programming, started to socialize with people outside of Artemisa's group, and little by little I recovered a part of myself that I had lost during our relationship. Months later, I still remember that birthday. Not for the cake, not for the prank, not even for the argument. I remember it because it was the day I finally stopped wondering if I was overreacting. I didn't need Artemisa to acknowledge what she had done. I didn't need her friends to agree with me either. For the first time, I simply accepted that a person could love you and at the same time treat you badly. And I also understood that loving someone doesn't mean you have to stay. That's how my relationship with Artemisa ended. And although it hurt me a lot for a while, over the months I understood that it was probably the best decision I could have made because the problem was never that I didn't know how to understand her humor. The problem was that she had learned that she could hurt me and then use tears to avoid taking responsibility, and I had finally stopped playing that game.